Thank you again, welcome, and thank you again for joining us for today's Colby-Sawyer Community Conversation. We're happy to have so many friends and neighbors online with us today to hear President Stuebner talk about the college's plans for reopening in the fall. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Dan Parrish. I'm the Vice President for College Advancement at Colby-Sawyer. I'll be moderating today's session and directing your questions to President Stuebner. We received a number of questions in advance of today's session, and President Stuebner will address some of those topics in her opening comments. After she completes her presentation, I'll relay other questions that we received in advance to her that came in when you RSVP'd. I will also then relay questions to her from the chat. You can submit questions through the chat or through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So before I turn things over to Sue, just a few words about how the Zoom webinar room works. You can open the chat and the Q&A boxes by moving your mouse and selecting from the choices at the bottom of the screen on your computer, or if you're on a mobile device, just tap your device and you'll see the choices there at the bottom. You should also be able to adjust your view of the speakers and the presentation by moving your mouse and using the choices at the top right-hand corner of your screen, whether you're using a computer or a mobile device. We are recording this webinar and we'll make it available to all registrants by early next week. Thank you again for joining us, and without any further ado, let me hand things over to President Stuebner. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks so much for those of you who've joined in this afternoon. Looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to talk today about the college's plans for reopening in just a few weeks here and having our students return. And before I get into some of the specific details, you know, really all of our conversations were guided by what we can do that is safe for our students and for our community, and community including the town of New London. And so hopefully you'll be pleased with some of the precautions that we're trying to take to do just that. There we go. Just in terms of process, there's been a lot of folks working really hard on this particular issue of how to reopen and do so in a safe manner. Laura Sykes, our academic vice president, was actually on a task force that met multiple times that made recommendations to the governor about how colleges and universities, what factors they should consider when reopening this fall. And our plan that I'm going to outline really follows those guidelines and recommendations closely. We also have an incident response team that's been meeting since early March when COVID-19 first hit. And they've been talking about what we did at the end of the spring, but then also turned their attention quickly to how do we think about the fall and what needs to be in place. I have a senior leadership team that I work very closely with. They have been involved, as has an executive committee of our board of trustees. And then this has been a time where I've been talking to other presidents, probably more so than ever, just to hear about what they're doing on their campuses and through listservs and phone calls and through different consortia that I'm part of. Just to hear really what other schools are doing so that we can all learn from each other's best practices. So just to start, we will be welcoming our students back on campus for classes starting on Labor Day. And one of the things that we'll be doing is having a condensed 12-week fall semester. There won't be any fall break, and classes will end the day before Thanksgiving. And then students will depart. We will have final exams after they depart, and those will be done remotely. And all of this is to try to get our students home by Thanksgiving, hopefully before any kind of second spike in the virus, and to prevent them from having to go home from Thanksgiving and then come back to finish up the semester. One of the things that we had to do in order to fit all of our course content into those 12 weeks is the class sections themselves will be anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes longer. And a lot of work has gone into just mapping out what that'll look like for each class and for each student's schedule. So that's kind of the the framework of our academic calendar. In terms of the actual classroom experience, we actually looked at the square footage for every classroom on campus, and we determined a maximum occupancy based on social distancing of 6 feet between each desk. And we've removed a number of desks from the classroom so that even if students try to move the desks around, they'll still be only the maximum number of students in a classroom that will allow us to maintain that social distancing. What will end up happening for classes that are larger than 15 is we will likely have a hybrid component where students will be split into 2 groups, some that will be in person with their faculty member and some that will be in a Zoom session in another classroom, hopefully fairly adjacent to the main classroom, so that if they do have questions for the faculty member, they might be able to stop by the other classroom and ask after class. And then those students would switch, and the next class session, those that had Zoomed, the one would be in person, and then the vice versa. So there'll be a hybrid component, but it will be all here on campus. We were also very fortunate to get a grant from the Davis Education Foundation that allowed us to purchase webcams for every classroom. And so that has enabled us to really pursue this virtual option. In terms of health and safety measures, all of the campus community members will be asked to wear a mask when they're unable to maintain a social distance of 6 feet. Our employees are doing this already, and our students will be asked to do the same. The desks will be wiped down between classes by the students. There's already facilities throughout the summer has installed containers with the wipes so that they can make it as easy as possible in each classroom to just grab a wipe down your desk between classes and make it part of the new culture. Our housekeeping also has just really strict protocols for what they need to do within the COVID-19 era in terms of cleaning and making sure that the campus is as safe as possible. All community members will also be asked to complete a daily screening check. It's again something that our employees are doing already. It's something that you can put right on your phone, and there's, I think, 7 or 8 questions in terms of, do you have a fever? Have you traveled out of New England? Have you been exposed to COVID? Someone with COVID in the last 14 days? Those kinds of questions. So our students will join the employees in answering those questions every day as part of being here. We also have a pretty aggressive testing protocol that we're going to be following. Students who live out of New England will be asked to return to campus with a negative COVID test within the last couple of days prior to their arrival. We will test all students and employees at the start of the semester and then retest 10 to 14 days after that. And then following that second complete test, we will move to a weekly sampling, and the number of students or employees that will be tested will depend on the incidence of COVID in New Hampshire, in our county, as well as any cases that we might have on campus. So the greater prevalence of the virus in any one of those 3 components, the more folks that we'll sample. If things stay reduced, then we'll sample a pretty small number, but we will be doing weekly samples. In terms of residential life, one of the things we did for our returning students is we gave them the option of staying in the room that they had originally signed up to live in, or gave them an option to live in a single at no extra charge. And I would say that about a quarter to a third asked for singles. For first year students, all of our first year students will be in singles or our largest double rooms, again, just to help accommodate with the social distancing. We've removed a lot of furniture from our residence halls, just as we have from the classrooms, so that again, the social distancing can be maintained even in the residence halls. Our students are going to move in a staggered process that'll start on August 17th. We don't want them all arriving all at once. So we will have them come. They have a chance to sign up for the date that they want to arrive, and they will be tested then upon their arrival. And then we'll be here on campus until the 7th when we start our classes. We've also had to identify a space for quarantine, and that's going to be the homestead, which is on the edge of campus. It actually has 6 or 7 restrooms in it and can accommodate a number of students should we get to that point and need to use quarantine space. One of the things that's been communicated already to students and will be communicated several more times before they arrive and as they're here is that we're going to have a number of new policies this year that are part of our student handbook or our code of conduct. One is that masks are to be worn when social distancing is not possible. We'll also be doing education with them to wear their masks in New London if they venture downtown and adhere to whatever the local businesses require as well. We have an essential travel only for students, and that's that they need to stay within the New England states. Some of our students do work during the weekends, and so we wanted to make that possible for them to continue. But otherwise, essential travel really only for family emergencies or needing to go to the doctor back home or that kind of thing. We also have visitor policy. No outside visitors will be, it's a little bit harkened back to our Colby Junior days, will be allowed anywhere except for the lounge spaces of the residence halls and will be more likely in the public spaces. And we will have a social gathering policy where students will not be able to have large social gatherings in the fall semester. And all of these are part of our conduct system. So if a student doesn't comply, they'll go through the conduct system just like they would for any other policy. In terms of campus dining, everything will be served versus buffet style from behind the plexiglass. The tables, a number of tables have been removed from the main dining hall to allow for social distancing, and we'll also be using the pub space for eating options. There will be a lot of express dining options so that students can grab something and maybe in the better weather eat it outside. Our facilities folks made a number of really nice new picnic tables that will be perfect for the better weather for our students to be outside where it can be less risk for contagion. There will be limits on who can use the dining hall. Faculty and staff are traditionally frequenters of our dining hall, that they'll be allowed to do to-go options, but at least at the start of the semester won't be, will be asked not to stay and eat their lunch there. Community members will also, I know we have some who really enjoy coming and enjoying the cuisine at our dining hall, and unfortunately, at least for the fall semester, we'll have to prohibit that just to create space for our students. And certainly meals will be provided to our students that are in the homestead and in the quarantine. Just this week, we announced that there will be no fall intercollegiate athletics. Just looking at the data and looking at all the different options, this seemed like the most prudent direction to go. Even some of the sports where there's some natural physical distancing, such as tennis or cross country, you still have to transport the students from here to another school. And that means figuring out social distancing on vans or buses and that kind of thing. Our conference schools, none of them are also offering athletics. But we will be working hard with our student athletes to keep them engaged. We're working closely with our athletic trainers so that they can have some kind of practices in safe manner. And we'll also use this opportunity to do a lot of team building and various trainings for our student athletes so they're not just completely idle all fall. Education is going to be a huge part of this. We're essentially trying to influence the behavior of 18 to 22-year-olds, and so a lot of education is critical to doing that. We have 4 students this summer working on a great social media campaign. They just did a video this week that came out on social media about the appropriate way to wear a mask and how you take care of the mask. Which was both fun but also educational, got a lot of traction. And I gave you just a sample of, they did a COVID-19 Mythbusters, but they have about, I think, a dozen to 15 different topics that they're going to be doing social media a campaign before the start of school, including what your classroom will look like, what it'll look like in the dining hall, what it might look like in your classroom, just to give students an idea of what to expect when they get back. So we've got kind of the student-to-student communication through social media. And then, as I mentioned, the specific policies, students will be required to review them and sign off on them prior to receiving their room key. And so there is a prescribed way that they will learn each new policy before they get that key to their room. Just in terms of community interaction, we're very sensitive to the fact that we're part of New London, and we want to make sure that we do this safely and don't put the larger community at risk. Hogan Sports Center will continue to have hours for the community members, but those will very likely be limited. We don't know exactly what hours they'll be yet. They'll be hopefully enough that folks can get over and use the space, but we're going to try to keep the students separate from the local residents in the sports center as much as possible. We're taking a look at the same kind of policy for the library. I talked already about the dining hall. Adventures in Learning, I know that they'll be having a mixture of courses online as well as having a few of their courses that will run actually in their classroom. Just looking at their square footage, there's enough space in their classroom for 15 learners plus the instructor. And so I think they're going to have just a handful of courses that might be held in that space. And then finally, just finances. The COVID is definitely something that has caused us to look at our finances again very closely. It has substantial costs associated with the number of things that we need to do. Some of the biggest cost drivers are testing for our students and our employees. The single rooms we offered without an upcharge, so that's another significant portion of the $1 million that you see there on the screen. We are fortunate, though, that we have received some funding from the federal government, as well as some state funding that helps defray a good portion of that $1 million. But it is something that we, an unanticipated cost that we wouldn't have expected 6 months ago, that's for sure. We do have liability and risk statements that are also going to be incorporated into some documents going out shortly so that students will know exactly what our refund policies will be, and just an acknowledgement that that COVID is a virus, and that the college has taken as many steps as possible to try to limit transmission. So I think that's all I have for slides, and I would love to hear what's on people's minds.
Great. Thank you so much, Sue. Really helpful and a lot of good information. One question that came in early was whether we will have any students who will take courses only online and not in person at all, and what that might look like.
Yeah, we'll just have a very small handful of students that will take courses only online. Essentially, we're granting that just to students who have health issues that would prevent them from returning. Otherwise, we expect the students to return.
Great. You mentioned Adventures in Learning, and we had one specific question. And just to fill in a little more detail on what Sue said, for those who are Adventures in Learning members, AIL will offer 9 courses total this fall. 6 of those will be online, and 3 will be offered as in-person options. So they'll cap as Sue said, they'll cap the number of people in the classroom, the number of learners at 15. They'll have an instructor or the discussion leader to make it 16. And that fall catalog will come out probably at the end of next week or the following week. It'll go in the mail. So you'll get lots of information about that. And they have been working, their executive board and curriculum committee has been working really hard in making plans, and they've done a really nice job getting it all lined up. They also have an August lecture series going on right now. So if you're a member of AIL, you probably already know about it, but if not, you can get in touch with Nina through the AIL email, and she can let you know about the lecture series. That's a nice way to test out Zoom. If you're not used to learning in that format, you can do a practice run during August. One of the questions that came in, you touched a little bit on this, Sue, but just for more detail, how will the college notify the town if we have a significant outbreak on campus? What's our communication method back and forth?
Yeah, I think my first stop would probably be to reach out to Kim Hallquist, the town administrator, and the selectmen. And then, I'm sure we would put out some kind of statement using emails that we have for the local community, should we find ourselves in that situation.
Great. And I know we're still doing some work on the shape of the testing. Have the testing services given us a sense of what the turnaround will be for testing results yet, or is some of that changing because it's changing for them right now too?
No, our understanding is that we should be able to get the results from our tests within 24 to 48 hours. Now, the days that we have as many as 200 students being tested at a time, the turnaround time might be a little bit slower, but we're told 24 to 48 hours is the turnaround time.
Great. And you mentioned Hogan, and I'll fill in some blanks on a specific question about Hogan. We had a question about the pool, which has not been open for a little while, and whether it will be opening. And right now, there's actually some maintenance being done on the pool, some tile work, so that is being finished up. Lisa Lacombe, who's the director of the Hogan Sports Center, tells me that will be finished up soon. They hope to start filling the pool next week. Some of you who've been through this before with us when we shut down sometimes know that it takes a couple of weeks to fill, get it balanced, do all the chlorine, all the things that have to be done. But Lisa's hope is that by the 2nd or 3rd week of August, we'll be offering hours at the pool. As Sue said, when the semester starts, we're gonna have to work to make the hours work for our guests. And Lisa will be emailing members to provide updates on the overall Hogan schedule, but also on the pool opening schedule, so you know. And we've been told pools are really safe, and she's got guidelines from the CDC on your walk from the locker room to the pool, what you do when you're there, and your walk back. So you'll have more instruction than you want about that once that opens up. This is a bigger question, Sue, not a specific kind of factual question, but somebody's wondering if you're comfortable sharing your top 3 concerns for opening in the fall, and just what's on your mind and what's keeping you up at night.
Sure. No, I think, I think the biggest concern is that we're relying on the behavior of 18 to 22-year-olds. And, hopefully that's one of the reasons that we have such an aggressive education and policy campaign, so that they understand between the education that we're doing as well as the specific policies that we've created, that that there's a responsibility to being part of the community this fall that is different than has been in previous years. So that's one. I actually have a nephew who will be who will be a senior this fall, who's in one of our college houses, and he had a couple questions about the testing that we talked about earlier this week. And I said, I hope you saw the social distancing and the social gathering policy. And he said, well, that's okay, Aunt Sue. If we're really good this fall, maybe we'll have a chance to have some parties in the spring. So, if we can get our students to really take it seriously and understand and not act like you see some of the young people in the states where there's real hot spots, I think we'll be okay. The finances are another concern. Just we think we have a good handle on how much this is going to cost us, but there's always unexpected things that pop up. I think we've had some really good discussion with the board about what to do if that happens, but that would be a second concern. And then, there's just the third concern of, this is a lot of work for our faculty. They are having to teach both, a classroom. They're going to be teaching 2 different classrooms, one in person and one on Zoom. And they have a lot of preparation and a lot of work that they've got to do in order to be ready for the fall. And I worry about just the toll it takes on them, especially after a very intense spring. So those would be the 3 biggest concerns I have at this point.
Great.
Good question.
Yeah, well, the second half of this question is also really good, and that's just what the comprehensive contingency plan is if we start seeing positive tests, and what our steps are in terms of movement.
Sure. First, if we start to see a positive test, the first thing we'll do is quarantine. If we start to see several positive tests, or if we start to see a spike, perhaps not on campus, but just in our area or back in New Hampshire again, then our contingency plan is really returning to remote learning and sending the students home again. We haven't really talked about specific threshold for that yet, but it's on our minds and something that we'll have to determine as we get closer to the start of the semester.
Great, thank you. You may have seen that in the chat we had a follow-up question about testing, and I'm not sure I understand it, so I'm going to ask you, because you may know the terminology better. Will we be pooling testing? And I know that after our initial testing, we're doing smaller groups, so if you know the answer to that and understand the terminology, then I'm going to leave that in your hands.
Technically, it's not pooled testing what we're doing. It's very close. It's our own sampling. And again, it's based on the prevalence of COVID on our campus, in our county, and in the state. Pooled testing is a newer approach that is far less cost, where you don't have to test as many individuals. So we're kind of doing that just by doing a random sample and basing the size on those 3 factors. The amazing thing about testing is it's changing so quickly. There are rapid tests that are available now that I believe Proctor Academy is going to be using. instead of the nasal swabs. It's something we're watching very, very closely because it could be by the middle of the semester, we're using a different kind of test than another. We're working closely with New London Hospital, who will be our partner on the testing. And what they have available is, what we'll be using. So it's technically not pooled testing, but it's very close to it because we're doing a random sample based on those 3 factors that I talked about.
Great. You explained this early in the walkthrough, but just to revisit students' travel to and from campus, you mentioned, trying to limit the travel. We have some students who go home and work at home, and we just had a follow-up, I think, because it was early. Can you just recap that sort of restriction on,
Sure.
on students coming and going from campus a little bit?
Sure. So we'll be asking students, again, what we're calling it essential travel only, which would include working at home, family emergencies, doctor's appointments, but only in the New England states. And we would likely include those students when they come back in the testing. They would not be part of, they would be a non-random person that would be tested upon their return, just to help ensure the safety of the community.
Great. Any thoughts on what folks in the community can do to support and help the college? One of the questions that came in early before we held this was just what role the community plays in this and how they can help us.
I think one is maybe just patience with some of the changes that you'll see on campus in terms of, a little bit less access to places that some community members in the past have really enjoyed using. Our compromise with Hogan is that there will definitely be hours, but they won't be as extensive as you've seen in the past. So we ask your patience with some of those changes in policies so that we can keep both the residents and our students safe. Other than that, nothing major comes to mind. I think just the continued, there's always been wonderful support for the college and the community, and hopefully this fall we'll get through the 12 weeks and can be having hopefully a slightly different conversation in the spring.
Right. Great. You mentioned that we're partnering up with New London Hospital on the testing. Our friend Doug Lyon, who knows the college and the hospital really well, is just wondering how that partnership works and the progress that we're making as we get closer and closer to students returning.
Well, I know that there's another meeting this week, and I know that we're working really hard to help the hospital have as much information about our students, being able to give them upon their arrival, their name and their doctor and their insurance information, so that the waves of testing, that first wave and then the 10 to 14 days later will be the 2 really big crunch periods in terms of volume. But there's been a number of meetings, and I know there's another one this week just to talk about which days are going to be busiest and what we can do on our end to make the process as easy as possible for the hospital. But we're really grateful for the partnership and the fact that they're right here in town as well. Right.
We're really lucky to have that. You have regular communication, obviously, with Tom Mannion, but also with Kim Hallquist, and to have those relationships and partnerships in town, and have New London be a small enough community that you can pick up the phone makes a big difference, because we're gonna increase their load all at once, and being able to prepare for that is a really big help.
Absolutely.
There's one really sort of just, it's a kind of narrow practical question. You mentioned the spacing in the classrooms and that we're keeping distance. From day to day, from one day to the next, how do we maintain that those classrooms will stay spaced out, and that people won't just take all the tables and put them together or move desks around?
Well, I think, I don't know that housekeeping will have the capacity to be moving desks back into their original location, but I think faculty will be keeping a very close eye on it. One of the conversations I've been having with a couple faculty who do capstones is just how do you do group work in a socially distant way? So I think, the faculty will be working with students to move the desks back at the beginning of classes, uh, just to make sure that we stay safe.
I was just going to, Laura Sykes, who's the Vice President for Academic Affairs, just confirmed what I was about to say. One of our employees told me last week that he's going around to classrooms and putting tape on the floor. So there'll be walking aisles and tape where the desks belong, so that there will be a permanent reminder, so that if people are trying to move things around, they know where they're supposed to be. So some of our solutions are really sophisticated and high tech, and some solutions are just old fashioned. You just put tape on the floor and let people know where things need to stay.
And similarly, I know we're going to have, directional, either tape or footprints or something, just, in Colgate Hall, which is our main classroom building, so that just to direct the flow of traffic, so that students are going up one stairwell and coming down a different one, and so to limit the volume that way as well.
Do you know for athletics, Sue, another question that came up was, will teams practice? And for the winter sports teams, I think what the conference has said is even a winter sport that would typically start in the fall, there will be no competition during the fall, and we're pushing out any final decisions on that until winter. But I just want to be sure that I have that right in responding to people's questions.
I'll take the second one first. Yeah, we actually have a call next week to talk about winter sports, because we haven't really tackled that one yet. For fall sports, they are allowed to do what's called a non-traditional season.
Yep.
And that's mostly just practice amongst themselves. But again, we'll be working really closely with our athletic trainers to make sure that the practices are done in a way that that you think about, like each student brings their own water bottle that they've filled out themselves, rather than everyone putting their hands on a large water container and refilling their water bottles. There's little details like that our athletic trainers have already thought of, and guidelines, so that if they do practice, they have a number of practices they're allowed to have in the fall. And there's a possibility that we may be able, depending on how the spring shapes up, play the fall sports in the spring. It's just going to be a matter of whether our individual school infrastructures can actually accommodate that.
We just had a question come in about the timing of return for the winter semester.
Right now, we anticipate it will be the third week of January, which is typically when our students return. Depending on where the virus is at that time, we could look very similar to the fall in terms of a staggered move-in. So again, that we don't have all students arriving all at once. We may end up condensing the semester again. It just really depends on where the virus is, and how prevalent it is in New England especially.
And as you said about the testing, things are still changing so quickly that we have some time to be able to see what the landscape looks like here, what it looks like around the country. And part of sending our students home before Thanksgiving is to simplify some of those decisions, that they won't be here during finals, and we can look ahead to January and make some plans based on what's happening at that time.
Exactly.
Great. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered a lot of questions. in one form or another, we've covered all the questions that came in beforehand. Oh, here we go. We have a nice note thanking people for creative decision making and really trying to be ahead and looking ahead. There is a question. Oh, are students coming in from outside of New England? And the short answer to that is yes. You mentioned, Sue, earlier what we're asking of students coming from outside of New England before they arrive. That was one of our first points. I don't know if you want to just mention the testing protocol for them again.
Sure. Yeah, so for students who live outside of New England, they are asked to bring a negative COVID test from within the last 3 or 4 days with them to campus. They will still be part of the group that's tested upon arrival. If for some reason they live in a state where testing is just not available, they will have to quarantine here. They'll need to be an early arrival, close to the 17th, and quarantine until they do have a negative COVID test, which they hopefully would have within a couple days.
I have one final question that I just want to ask you, not because it came up here, but because I've heard it around town. Folks are curious about enrollment. We're all reading a ton about what's happening across the country in higher education, and I talked to a few folks over the last week or so who've asked whether who saw our news in the spring that we were in really good shape. We have a strong group coming in. So what's the answer on July 23rd to that question?
No, great question. We're still tracking very well and positively on both first year and returners. Our returning numbers are especially strong in terms of retention. Our first year numbers, we had a goal of 230, and I believe we're at 244 plus 22 transfers. So we're looking good. There's still the possibility of students asking to defer at this point, but those have just been 1 or 2 here and there. So we're feeling very, very fortunate that we haven't seen. Some schools are really struggling with a pretty predominant melt right now, or losing some of that first year students. And for us right now, knock on wood, we're holding steady.
Yeah, that's great. You may have seen in the chat that a message came in to us about our former Colby-Sawyer colleague, Susan Reeves, and alumna. And do you want to share with people? I think some people have probably seen it in the news, but Susan's new role within the Dartmouth-Hitchcock system.
Yeah, we're very, very proud of Susan. She's been named the Executive Vice President of Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health and will be in charge of the day-to-day operations up there. She's our former dean of the School of Nursing and Health Professions, and is a significant partner of the school as we shift to health sciences. And so we're delighted for her. She's an enormously talented individual, and the hospital is very fortunate the health system is very fortunate to have her.
Great. Sue, thank you. I know it's hard to sit and talk for 45 minutes straight and be on camera and watch the questions coming in. This is really helpful. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are recording this session, so we'll send a follow-up email to all of you who registered. So you'll have that. If you want to share the recording with anyone, you're welcome to. We'll continue to do some more online events and programs in the months ahead, particularly during the fall. We'll try to get away from COVID programming and do some lectures and other kinds of events, but we'll come back to these updates now and then as well. So thank you all for joining us. You've been a really great group, a lot of good questions. And when you get the email from us, if there are any other questions that come up or any clarifications that you need, just let me know. Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here.